Grab some coffee, a Mountain Dew, maybe both. A storm is brewing. The Brainstorm. Welcome to The Brainstorm with Matt and Mike.
Hey, welcome to The Brainstorm with Matt and Mike. Today's show is all about radio, the business of radio, advertising on the radio, all the benefits and advantages of radio. And yes, Mike, there are some disadvantages, some negatives of radio. We're going to touch a little bit about that as well, because I kind of feel like we have to give the good, bad, and the ugly anytime we do a show. And so it's not all peaches and cream on every type of advertising medium. Now, with the digital world, obviously, it's pretty solid, but there are some negatives to everything.
Sure.
Well, I know that you and I particularly aren't necessarily biased or unbiased to any type of medium, advertising medium, Mike. And so with the exception of digital, we believe that digital has got a spot for everybody. You got to have a digital footprint of some sort, whether it's just a website or some digital advertising, or somebody wants you to email them something, right? I mean, there's got to be some type of digital footprint, if you will. But Mike, talk to us about just the radio a little bit, advertising, just give us a little bit of stats when it comes to radio.
A couple of things, Matt. Radio years ago, I think, I don't know exactly when radio first hit the waves. I think maybe in the 20s.
The 20s.
Is that right?
Yeah,
Does that
that's
seem
when
right,
it got
Kevin?
really, really hot, I believe.
And, of course, it was probably primarily music.
Yeah.
Probably a very limited number of stations, limited reach. So everything was hyper local, and you kind of got what you got.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of like television was back then. Few channels, you hope that you got a few of them, and you watched whatever the programming was, or you didn't watch.
Yeah.
And today it's very different. Now we have many different stations, local stations, national stations, digital. A lot of it's digital today.
A lot of digital stuff,
And those stations that have evolved generally have local presence, and then they have the ability to stream their feed really, across the web. So really even beyond just within United States, it could go beyond into any country or continent.
So when it comes to the actual demographics, Mike, talk to me a little bit about just the demographics of who's listening to the radio. I mean, are large percentages still listening to the radio?
Yeah, so I would say Nielsen, a research firm, actually indicates that over 90% of all adults still frequently listen to some form of radio.
Wow.
Now, some of that's digital, some of that's local, and usually it's some combination of.
Right. Well, it would be impossible for telling me that radio is dead then.
Yeah, and to that point, Matt, even 18 to 34-year-olds yield that 90%.
Wow.
So that shows, because oftentimes people say, well, if you go younger, you're going to find that it's just not relevant.
Yeah.
And not just with radio. They're saying the same with television, print ads. There's a lot of media that people try and dismiss as not relevant anymore.
Right.
And the fact of the matter is radio is still extremely relevant.
Well, so I know that our viewers, the folks that engage with us all the time, are hearing us talk a lot about digital marketing and digital advertising strategies and tactics. So today we're talking offline. We're talking radio. Now, we will talk a little bit of streaming radio as well. So there's some online components to it. But today we're talking about offline tactics, and it matters, because I'm telling you that just as many business opportunities and driving revenue to your organization happens in the grassroots, offline, as well as it done online. Well, today, Mike, we're both excited. We have a good friend of ours, a great guest on our show, Keven Cohen. I know if you guys are listening to our show live on the radio, then you certainly know who Keven is, because our show is actually on his radio station. If you're connecting with us through our podcast or on our YouTube channel, then let me introduce you to a good friend of ours, Keven Cohen, the owner of The Point Radio. Keven, thanks for being on the show with us today.
Oh, thanks for having me, guys. It's great to see you guys.
Yeah, it is. I know we've been in lockdown recently, right? And so we haven't really been able to see each other very much. And so it is good to get back together with you.
When you first mentioned that we were going to talk about the good, bad, the ugly, I assumed that you were talking about yourselves.
Right. Yeah.
Because that's why I'm on radio, face for radio. But no, it's great to be here. And I'm glad that I knew you would, but I'm glad that you guys do your homework when it comes to the power of radio, because it's still an incredible medium. And anyone in radio that is naive to the changing of radio, well, then shame on them. But it is still a very powerful medium.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a very good point. a lot of people in all types of advertising tactics or mediums, they don't like to change with the times, and radio is one of those technologies that's changed quite a bit over the years with the introduction of streaming. Absolutely. Wouldn't you say,
Oh,
Kev?
God, yeah, you have to. And if you don't, you end up being Kmart.
Right.
I mean, we all know what Kmart was and the foothold it had in those type of stores. And then all of a sudden, slowly came along the Walmarts and the Targets. And next thing you know, the Kmart model was gone and things like that. If you don't change with the times, if you don't adapt yourself in this medium, then you will basically fade away.
Yeah. Well, Keven, talk to us a little bit. Give our viewers and our listeners, for those who don't know you, I know, again, if you're listening to us on the radio, then people are very familiar with Keven Cohen because you're the reason why people come over to 100.7 The Point and listen to your radio to begin with, because you started it when?
We started October 28th, 2013. Okay. So we're coming up on 7 years of doing the programming, and it's been a great adventure. This was after being here in the Midlands area, in the Columbia area, for about 19 years at one of the corporate jobs. And then they let me go in 2012. They were going in a, quote, different direction. The corporate line were going in a different direction.
Right.
Great folks over there. I got nothing bad to say about them because they gave me a beautiful home for 19 years. But the reality is I wanted to stay in Columbia. I wanted to stay in radio. So we decided to launch The Point, and we launched it, and it's been an incredible adventure so far. And we tried to do things a little bit different. I know you're going to talk a little bit about talk radio specifically a little different, or a little later, but I wanted to do things a little differently with our radio station than the traditional news talk station.
So we talk, Keven, in our show a lot about branding, and we did multiple shows on branding, Mike, and the importance of it. Why The Point? Well, give me some background. And if you just threw a dart and it hit the name, then just make something up.
No, there's a perfect explanation behind it. If you think about what we're doing with talk radio, what do you want each caller to do? What do you want the host to be able to do? You want them to be able to make a point. Yeah. You want to be able to get your point across. You want to be able to make other people see it from your point of view. Yeah. So that's kind of why I went that direction, and it just sounded like it was a good fit. No one had used that in the Midlands area before in terms of something that would already have branding or would be associated with any competition. So it just felt right. As soon as we came up with it, it felt right.
I love it. That's awesome. Exactly what Mike, and not what you were thinking probably. It is. That the story was.
And that's awesome. I love that.
Thank you.
Make your point.
Yeah. I mean, that's our website, even makethepointradio.com. Sure so I try to get callers to understand the need for them if they're kind of calling in on our shows and they're not there. I'm like, okay, make your point. Say what you need to say. I don't mean to be disrespectful. Make your point. We're the point. So that's kind of where I'm at. And if I'm not doing that, if I'm kind of mixing it up and bantering about too much, I'll kind of hit myself in the head and say, don't forget who you're supposed to be.
Yeah. I mean, I listen to talk radio on some XM every now and then. And
what is that?
I know what is that? I mean, should be talking local here.
No,
right?
That's okay. There's a place for that.
But no, there is, because when you're traveling long distances and you want to get engaged with a particular show, then that's a good spot to do it in. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. But you're exactly right. I hear people just ramble. So I love The Point. I love the branding of The Point. I love the name of The Point. And we enjoy being on that show.
Well, we love having you as part of the family, and that's one of the things that I know you guys really preach over here with what you do with Splash, and one of the things that I do at the radio station is we make it a point, and a family. Radio is romantic. I mean, and I mean that sincerely. I look into what I do every day, and I paint a picture. It's theater of the mind. It's an opportunity when there's a local crisis. It's an opportunity to help families, to help people get through what's going on. And when I say romantic, I mean, it's me and my microphone. I don't think about it as talking to thousands of people every day. I think about it as talking to you. Talking to you. That's it. I don't think about it and I don't refer to things on the air as, hey, what do all you think? What do you think? Because I'm talking to one person who's driving himself or herself home from work every afternoon, or driving to work, or I'm thinking about that one person. So it's romantic, but it's also a means of getting things out to people immediately. If there's a crisis going on, we don't get knocked off the air, whether it's a generator we have to flip to that'll keep our whole building, whatever, in a crisis, whether it's weather or it's tragedy or it's something that's been going on with rioting or whatever it is, we're going to stay on the air and we're going to be there local. We're going to get local officials and we're going to pass something on where no one else is doing it.
You know what I did when I was researching some information on radio, I found that, some of the benefits is, like you were saying, is a lot of times when there's bad weather, radio is one of the things that you can still get. A lot of times TV is out. A lot of times internet is out. And so when you're really wanting to hear something, especially in a crisis like you were talking about, radio is a medium that you absolutely can get to very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I know this is outdated a little bit now, but if you remember back a number of years ago when we had a massive snowstorm for Columbia, I'm not saying like a northern massive, but it basically put Columbia, South Carolina into gridlock. It was back in 2000. Mm-hmm. And what happened there is I was working part of the cluster at the other radio station group. It got so bad that I was on the air and I ended up being the station where everyone was listening to, because they took all 6 of the stations and put it onto our signal, because I was the only one who knew how to deal with it, because I'm a Yankee from up in Detroit. And so here I am on from 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and all the computers were out and everything was broken. So I had no commercials. I went from 3 p.m. until 1 a.m. trying to get people home. And of course, I had some help. I had a few people in the building that would help me. But I have had people for 20 years now come up to me and say, I first heard of you when? And it was because of that snowstorm. And I had never driven in this, and I was stuck in it, and I was scared in it, and my wheels were doing this, and I didn't know. And you kept telling me what to do and keeping me calm. And it's things like that for 20 years. That is a career-defining moment. Now, I didn't know it at the time,
right?
But nonetheless, to this day, I still have folks telling me that. Yeah. So you can be there for people when they need you most, or you could be there when your team in a city like Columbia, when the Gamecocks win a championship, when Clemson wins a championship, you can be there to help people celebrate something that was magical to them, something they'll never, ever forget. You can be a part of things, and you'll have more people that'll tell you that, hey, Kev, I've never met you, but I think of you as a friend. Mm-hmm. That is the greatest radio compliment you can get.
One of the things, Mike, that he just talked about is, you and I being Clemson fans, we love the fact that you just talked about Clemson winning a championship. But one of the things that really brings that point is the relevancy of radio. Like, you're not ever going to talk on the radio about something that happened 3 months ago or 6 months ago. And a lot of times the news that we look up and find really literally is weeks, sometimes months old, whereas the radio is usually very relevant at that moment in time.
We have the ability, because of being able to change with the technology now, that if there's a news conference going on, I have the ability to stop what I'm doing and immediately carry the governor giving his update on COVID-19, carry the president giving his update. I can immediately, if there's something that's happened that's tragic, I can immediately go to our source, which is ABC News, and I can immediately carry an ABC News report going on in Yemen, going on from wherever it is around the world. And that's the immediacy that we're able to bring to our platform that is still different than in many other ways. If it's a written platform, obviously you're waiting until the next day for a print. If it's something even digitally online, yes, you can get an alert immediately, but still someone has to type out the content or things like that. Now, of course, they can also carry video and things like that online. And again, that's the beauty of technology changing. But yeah, that's something with the immediacy of radio and the ability to adapt to whatever's going on. And that comes down to our format, which is talk radio. We're not worried about music, so we're going to want to play, and we're going to want to put our egos aside and go right to what is out there for you right now.
That's awesome. So, every medium really has an audience, and now more than ever, things are segmented. Programming has to really, really impact the audience it's attempting to reach, and it needs to be hyper relevant for them. Talk about who your audience is with your station, and then maybe some of the programs within it, and who you're really trying to reach.
Well, one of the things that I think is so special, guys, about talk radio is it's just like you said, it's a niche format. And because of that, I want you to think about everyone that's watching us right now and listening to us right now. Every time you get into your car, for example, you've got 5, 6, 7, maybe 10 stations programmed on your radio. If you are someone looking for music, you're going to go to station number 1 that you think is a good station for you. If you don't hear a song and you hear a commercial, you're probably going immediately to 2, 3, 4 until you get to what you want. If you don't hear a song you like, you're probably going 2, 3, 4, 5 until you find a song that you like. With talk radio, you're not looking for a song, you're looking for content. And if you come, you're looking for Keven Cohen, or you're looking for one of our other hosts, Dave Ramsey, you're looking for Matt and Mike on the Brainstorm. You're looking for something specific. And as long as you find that, you're already in your head willing to give that a few minutes in order to see what they're talking about. Hey, what are Matt and Mike talking about this week on the Brainstorm? So there's an inherent, loyalty built into talk radio that is so special. As for our demographic, that was what I was telling you in our first segment, something I wanted to change a little bit about traditional talk radio. When I started The Point, my attitude was, I don't want to be another station talking to 60-year-old white men. I don't mean that to be disrespectful to the 60-year-old white man, because one day I hope to get to that point. But I wanted to talk to a younger audience, and I wanted to talk to a diverse audience. I wanted to talk to an audience where everybody has a seat at our table. Mm-hmm. When I talk about controversial topics, I want someone who is a flaming liberal to feel comfortable calling me a conservative. I want somebody who's 32 years old, African-American female, to call me. I wanted everybody to know right up front, you have a seat at our table. And that's something that I've tried to establish with all of our local hosts, is to make sure everyone feels welcome. And that, I think that's been a good part of our formula. And it's very different from traditional talk radio across the country.
I agree.
Yeah, I mean, you just made a lot of points, right? And we're going to use the word point a lot today on our show.
Thank you.
But you just made a lot of really good points, because you are right. Talk radio is very, very loyal. The listeners are very loyal. And they usually tend to define themselves as far as demographics, right? And so depending on the show itself, whereas you're very inclusive of your demographic as far as people that you want. But at the end of the day, your show still has a certain demographic, as in a lot of shows, right? And
well, it does. I mean, think about it this way. You're still talking about someone who wants to get something more out of their drive to or drive home from work,
right?
Versus they've had a long day at work. They just want to listen to music and not have to think about anything. Yeah. I'm telling you now, if you don't want to think about anything, then you shouldn't listen to my show in the afternoon. Because I'm going to try to give you something to think about. And the callers that call in, I'm going to try to get something from them, and that I can have something to think about. There's no ego when it comes to this. I have an ego, don't get me wrong. I think I'm good at what I do, and I'm passionate about what I do. But I'm willing to learn every single day from my callers. If I don't feel like I've learned something at the end of the show from the callers, I feel like I failed. I really mean that. And so that's a big part of what we do on The Point is we engage. These days, the so-called consultants always tell you, you don't need to worry about phone calls. You don't have to worry about that. Just you talk, and they'll tune in for you. And I've gone the exact opposite from the consultants. I want the callers to be the stars of the show. I get enough airtime. It's my radio station. I get enough airtime doing 2 shows a day. I want the callers to feel like it's their show. Thus, the community feels like it's their radio program.
Go ahead, Mike.
I'll tell you what I agree 100% with you, Kevin. It's a two-way conversation. And what you said earlier is that you go about every single thing that you share, and you talk to an individual. You speak as if you're having a conversation with a one-on-one conversation with someone who's interested in the topic that you're discussing. And today, that's what people want. They don't want to be talked at. They want to be talked with. And so they want to be heard.
Sure.
And they want, when you are willing to listen to what they have to say, they're much more receptive to hear your point of view.
Mike, if you look at what's going on right now with the climate of this country, I think that's the one thing that is more important to say about this than anything else. And that is, if you're going to do talk radio and you're going to talk about controversial topics, there's nothing wrong with that. You should be willing to go there, but you need to be willing to listen as much as you are willing to try to educate others. You need to be willing to be educated. And I think really, in this last couple of months between the coronavirus and with what we've encountered, obviously with rioting and peaceful protesting, with everything that's happened, I have found myself being educated, and I've had an open-mindedness to being educated by people that have walked in a different path than what I've walked with. And again, that's the niche of talk radio that you can't get in music. It's no knock on music,
right?
But that's the niche that we can bring you, is we give people a voice on everything. And it is a powerful, powerful voice, because at this time, this country is very divided, and we've got an election coming in November, and this is a perfect opportunity for people to vent and people to get things off their chest. My goal, one of my goals with The Point every day is, hey, you just got off of work, you're stressed, something's bugging you, let's get it out of your system so that by the time you get home, you don't have to kick the cat.
Yeah, that's good stuff. So just very quick, some benefits of radio from a listener's perspective. It's very relevant. We said that a minute ago. It's very timely. I love that. It's also portable. I like the fact that it's one of the only mediums that is portable. Now, take the cell phone out of play and the connection between social media. That's extremely portable. But radio is also portable. It's free. It's adaptable. And it's inclusive, especially when it comes to your show, Kevin.
Really, when people are listening to music, it's a very kind of a passive type of activity, where when you're listening to talk radio, it's very active, especially when you have an engaged audience that's calling in and they're weighing in on topics. Some may be controversial, some may not be as controversial, but what happens is you end up with an audience that's really actively listening and engaged. And so when they hear an advertisement, they're much more likely to absorb that message, to process it, and it's much more likely to make an impression on them.
Well, there's a couple things that tend to stand out. One is we call it active listening. If you think about it, just and everyone that's watching us or listening to us right now can understand this. If you have music on in your car or even at work or at home, wherever it is, and something changes, that stream, if you would, that stream of consciousness, that music that's been in the background, even if you don't know the name of the song or the singer, but all of a sudden you go from song, and then you go into commercial. Something in your mind is like, wait, something's just changed. And subconsciously you're like, wait a second, something just changed. I'm going to change the station. And that happens a lot. And you go find some more music. With talk radio, it's not like that. You have an active listening. You're not keeping it on just for the background noise. You're keeping it on because you want to engage, as you mentioned. The other thing that stands out about that is when you're dealing with talk radio, you invest into the topic. Mm-hmm. You're almost forced to choose a side, one way or the other, if it's an engaging topic. And so because of that, you've already chosen. I have people tell me all the time, I'm screaming at the radio while you're saying this, Keven. And I'm like, well, why don't you just pick up the phone and call?
Yeah.
And then scream at me. Yeah. But one way or the other, it's like, oh, I agreed with you so much on that. Oh, I thought you were crazy about that. But you're emotionally investing yourself you're throwing yourself into something. And it's a big difference than just, and it's why we call it passive listening versus active listening. You take an investment and you make it you make yourself part of that discussion. That really matters a lot. And plus, there's a difference between what we do on the morning show and the afternoon show. In the morning show, we use something called benchmarks a lot. Everybody knows when Keven is going to do it 7:35 every morning, today in history. Everybody's going to know when we're doing certain things. That's part of the subconscious also. If you're driving to work and it's 7:36 in the morning, and if you don't hear Keven and you're used to hearing Keven start doing today in history, something's missing because you're used to turning right onto Gervais at the exact same time. If Keven starts today in history and you're way back 2 miles from Gervais Street, then you know something's going on in you and you're behind schedule. It's incredible how psychologically you tune to that. So that's why we use benchmarks in the morning show very much to say, you better be here if you're on your way to work because you need to be at this point by now. And then in the afternoon, we do the call-ins and things like that to engage people. So there's a lot of art and science involved with trying to engage your listeners in talk radio.
You made two good points that I personally can relate to for sure. I know when I'm driving with my family or especially by myself, I don't like to drive late afternoons because I'm worn out, I'm mentally exhausted, and I start to get really sleepy, especially if I'm listening to radio from a music perspective, right? And so first thing I do is I turn on talk radio because then you're exactly right. Now all of a sudden that I get extremely engaged with that radio show or the content, and I have to choose a side, and now I'm part of it. I feel like I'm part of it. For an advertiser's perspective, my second point is from an advertiser's perspective, why it's great to actually advertise, especially on talk radio, is because now your brand is associated with the content, right? Or the controversy or whatever in a good way. Because what's happening is you're intently listening to what the commercial is about, the brand, so on and so forth. Whereas what you said a minute ago is also true when you're listening to radio from a music perspective, and then music goes off. You turn the radio station to find more music that's generally like the music you were just listening to, which means that you're not listening to the commercials.
Well, with talk radio, and this is no knock on the other formats, because I think there's something positive to take away from music formats. Also, kind of the opposite of what you just said, Matt, which is sometimes people need to wind down and cool down and put what happened at work away. And they don't want to hear something engaging, passionate, back and forth talk radio. So there's certainly a place for that. Trust me, I can understand that. But with advertising, one of the things that really stands out about talk radio is because you've sought out this radio station and this host. Number one, you're already invested and you feel a loyalty to that show, to that host, to that station. And when you feel those type of things, you feel almost compelled to want to support the businesses that believe in what you believe in, because it's like-minded. If they're advertising on this radio station, they must have the same values that I have. And that's a big part of the advertising part of it. And then when you hear one of our hosts do what's called an endorsement ad, where Keven Cohen will take to the radio and start talking about Splash Omnimedia, or start talking about why he believes in what you guys are doing here to help other businesses to grow, well, then people are going to say, well, I believe what Keven says. He's a good guy. He's been in Columbia for 30 years. He's a loyal husband. He's a loyal daddy. He's this, he's that. If he says this, then I'm going to trust that. And that has been absolutely gold for talk radio with hosts. And certainly for The Point, we take our endorsements very seriously, and we will not endorse just anybody if asked to do an endorsement. So I have turned down a lot of dollars over the years, and I'm very comfortable sleeping at night because I pick businesses to endorse that I genuinely believe in and use.
Yeah. Hey, let's stay with the advertising theme just for a second, being that we're a business building show, if you will. And so when it comes to talk radio, what I really like about the advertiser, the brand that you're trying to drive opportunity to, is this very selective targeting. Like you can specifically say that my demographic, my target market for my type of business looks like this, right?
Absolutely.
And therefore you can pick talk shows, you can pick radio stations, you can specifically pick that out, and it's very targeted selectively.
Sure. There are some businesses that I've talked to that have said, I want to ask you about advertising, and I'll get to know them a little bit about their business. And I just have to look them in the eye and say, listen, I don't think we're a good fit for you because here's who our audience is, but I think this is who you're looking for based on what you told me your customer is. And obviously there are some people in radio sales that will not just subscribe to that. They'll sell it and it won't work, and they'll get a quick hit and blah, blah, blah. That's not who I want to be. That's never who I want to be. And I have turned people back to the place that fired me. And said, I think that they have 6 radio stations in that building. I think this station would be a really good fit for you. Or another station over another cluster of stations. We're not for everybody. There's just no question about it. We do well for our demographic. We do well for the businesses that we think are a good fit. But there is a good fit for every business that's willing to advertise someone on radio, whether it's a music station, a talk station, a sports station, light listening, hard rock and roll. There's somebody for everybody if you have a business.
Another thing for our listeners to understand that radio advertising is very cost effective. Mike, we price out strategies and have different tactics in our strategies all the time. And when it comes to radio, radio definitely can be very cost effective. And when it comes to talk radio, I think it's even more effective from a cost perspective and a frequency perspective. Even more importantly, I think it's more memorable.
Right. So I would say that, again, what you were alluding to, and we mentioned early in the show, is so important to understand who your audience is that you're trying to reach.
Sure.
So if you, it's amazing how many people in business don't really have a clearly defined target audience. It's very loose. They're like, well, you'll hear them say things like anybody or everybody who fits like this or does this is a good fit for us. And it's not necessarily the case.
Usually people, I hate those two statements.
Usually people's audience is much more narrow,
right?
Or they have a number of audiences. And so the messaging needs to match who the audience is. And you've got to go serve it in a channel. In this case, we're talking talk radio, or any form of radio. You need to find the audience, where they hang out, where they're camping out, and serve the content there.
Yeah, and the way I phrase that, guys, is I say stay in your lane.
That's right.
Understand what your lane is. You better know your lane. That's the first key. But you better stay in your lane. And there's plenty of dollars out there. There's plenty of businesses out there if you stay in your lane. Yeah. You don't have to try to branch out to the point where you're losing your message. And then if you get this one client, that's great. But then you do a disservice to 20 other clients by doing so. Stay in your lane. There's plenty out there for each and every one.
I do want to touch a little bit on streaming radio because obviously over the years that has become very, very popular, especially from some demographics specifically. But really it's more in the realm, I would think, more in the realm of like recreational usage. It's very portable. Like I was on the beach this past weekend for Father's Day. And of course we were listening to Spotify, which is the largest streaming by subscribers. So it's the largest one by subscribers specifically. But I know other ones like Pandora and even iHeart. iHeart's really, really good from a streaming perspective, or have a lot of listeners from a streaming perspective, that is. So talk to me at anything that you give us some wisdom when it comes to just streaming music and or advertisers on a streaming perspective?
I think that it's definitely also has a niche. I think that the beauty of streaming services is you can take and get something so specific with that type of service. You can find something. I mean, you talk about one of the Pandoras or Spotify's, things like that. I'm a Bob Seger listener. I love Bob Seger. I've seen him in concert 19 times. I can find a Bob Seger channel, and it won't be every single song, but a lot of songs will be Bob Seger. And that works for me. So you can go ahead and find something. If you're that niche driven, you can find something very unique that you can't find with music stations over terrestrial radio. That's a very cool thing if you're into that. If it's even just one genre of music that you really, really like, that's cool. If it's a podcast that you've gotten yourself addicted to, that's a really cool thing. Podcasts are huge right now. And one of the things that's so great about the podcast is you mentioned how local it can be if you want it to be, how national it could be, anything. It could be about the dumbest topics in the world, but if it's your niche that you like, it's fine. You know, it could be about Matchbox cars and adults who like to collect Hot Wheels and Matchbox cars. And that
they'll
was
flock
great.
to it. Yeah,
that was great for me when I was 11 and 12 years old. Doesn't interest me now. But the point is, there is somebody that is a collector that really wants to hear about, hey, these things have gone up in value, or this or that, baseball cards, whatever it is. So yes, there's a definite place for streaming of music and of talk and things like that on all those different mediums that you discussed from a digital standpoint. And they're not going away. I mean, that's a big part of our future, is the specialty of it, because it's so easy to produce that now. It is so easy through technology for someone to mix together and put songs on. You can get songs. You can do it that way. They're so easy to make a podcast these days, and there's so many services that are out there. So that works. Does the advertising work on it? I don't know. I mean, obviously, I don't know from a revenue standpoint. I'm sure it works, or everybody wouldn't be doing it. I'm sure there's some aspect that it works pretty well with. So yeah, I think that there's a place for it. And again, I don't feel threatened by it as a local talk show host and as a local owner of a radio station. I think there's a definite place for that kind of stuff. Matt, you mentioned one of the things at the outset of the show, which is when you're driving across the country, you don't know the names or the locations on the dial of your favorite talk or your favorite this format radio station. So you find something on an XM that works for you and you stay with it. And that makes a lot of sense to me. You'll be driving through so-and-soville, Tennessee, and there's nothing there. And all of a sudden you're like, there's nothing here except for 13 different country stations. And that's it. I can't deal with that. Well, I want something else. I'll go right to a satellite radio, or I'll go right to a Pandora or a Spotify. I think there's a place for it. There really is. So as a local guy, I don't feel threatened for it, because I can still bring something to the table that nobody else can bring when push comes to shove and there's something going on locally.
I love it.
So what about when someone who really wants to follow your content, they're engaged with it, but now maybe they're traveling more frequently than they were in the past? How can they go about continuing to interact, enjoy your content, if they're in, whereverville, Tennessee?
It's easy. I mean, we have changed with the times just because of necessity and also wanting to grow and listen. We have a listener who calls in on a pretty regular basis from Perth, Australia. He listens to us on our website, makethepointradio.com. We have added to now, hey, Alexa, if you want to do Alexa, it's fine. Alexa, play 100.7 The Point. We have that now that we've added. If you want to go that route, you could take that anywhere and have studio quality. If you want to listen off an app, and we have that for you too. So if you don't change with the times, if you don't make that available, I think that what we've done is make our listening choices on your smartphone as accessible and as easy to navigate as possible. Very mobile friendly to listen to us 24/7 anywhere you go. Doesn't matter if you're in the mountains, at the beach. Doesn't matter if you're in the bathroom. Doesn't matter if you're in your car.
That's awesome.
So, Keven, I just want to kind of pivot just for a second over to the business of radio.
Sure.
So you're a friend of mine, and I have a couple of other friends. One currently owns a different radio station, a music-based radio station, two, in fact. And then I had another friend that did own a radio station that subsequently sold it and got out of the radio station ownership type of spot. Talk to me about that. I mean, up until I met you guys, I never even thought about someone owning a radio station, because I always looked at them as more of a corporate or cluster of stations that are owned corporately, but someone owns them. So talk to me about radio station ownership. What was it like diving into that? What type of research did you do? Just your thought process around that and how it functioned.
Couple major philosophies with that. One is you're going to make mistakes like you do in every business. Try not to make the same mistake twice. So learn from your mistakes.
Good
and
point.
I think that's a very important thing for all of us in business is learn from your mistakes and just don't make the same mistake twice. Don't get crazy if you make a mistake, because we all do. We're human beings. The other thing about it is we used that phrase earlier, stay in your lane. Understand what you're trying to accomplish. You guys have talked to me about setting goals, not being afraid to set goals, have very specific goals and some more general goals, and have a plan, a 1-year plan, a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan, all of those things. That applies to radio. That applies to so many of our businesses. And as for radio specifically, some of the things that you have to understand, again, I think it applies to a lot of other businesses. Overhead, and when I say stay in my lane, boy, there's a lot of toys I would love that would be fun for my radio station to have, this piece of equipment or that piece of equipment, and I'll put it in my budget. But I will wait until I get to that point in my budget where I say, now you can go and get this.
Yeah.
And that was very hard for me at first when I started the station, because I'm like everybody else. I'm starting this. I'm competing. I'm a very competitive guy. Very competitive. And so I wanted to be able to do things ahead of the game that I wasn't ready to do. But I put certain things in my 2-year budget, certain things in my 3-year budget. First 9-10 months of the radio station, as with a lot of businesses, I was hemorrhaging dollars because, one, I was learning from my mistakes. 2, I had to it takes money to make money. I get all that, but we were bleeding dollars badly. And then slowly but surely we go from hemorrhaging to just a small drip of blood. And then we get to the point where we break even 10.5 months in. And here we are now approaching 7 years. We've made money every single month since our 10.5 months in. So you got to have a philosophy, and you got to be willing to stick to your plan. You cannot let emotion, you cannot let temptation drive you. You have to think these things through. And you also have to be willing to spend money in order to make money.
Yeah, I would assume in your first 9 months, that you say you were hemorrhaging money, stats sell. And so when we go to our advertiser, our clients, if you will, and we start saying, hey, well, we've decided that what we would like to do is add this or that, like radio or social media or whatever, into your marketing strategy, we have to have an educated understanding of why we want to do it, right? And so in your first 9 months, you were probably trying to just build listenership in order to say, hey, here's my format, here's what I have, in order to be able to get advertisers on your show.
Sure. A lot of that was take a leap of faith in me. It's something. And there's a lot of businesses that say, hey, Kev, I love you. You're a great guy. I've been listening to you for 20 years, blah, blah, blah. But I don't have the money to just say, hey, I believe in you so much, and get back to me when you can show me, what can you do for me lately? And so I think your philosophy on that, Matt, is exactly right. But there were some folks out there that said, we'll give you a shot. We'll give you a shot early. And several of them are still with us today, 7 years later.
Mike, take us home, man. I know that you got a question for him.
That's those early adopters, and we all need those when we're entering new territory. But then that majority finally kicks in, and that's where you really build your momentum. And so that's great. You mentioned you had a plan, you had a vision, but then the strategy. And we've talked about vision a lot in other shows, but vision, you cast that and it should pretty much remain the same. It may get a little more clear, but the strategy, you've got to be willing to adjust. And so we've gone through some interesting times with coronavirus recently. And so how people consume radio content has shifted some. There may be some who are not commuting the way they were. So we have to go reach them digitally. So I'm glad to know, I already knew that, but I'm glad that you're able to share how you're reaching your audience through a digital format, through a mobile device, or, through an app, or directly through your website. And so I think that's awesome. I think that we have to continue to adapt. We have to continue to adjust strategy. And I think if radio, like your station, has a great audience, we believe in it, or we wouldn't be on it.
Thank you.
And I think that you can do a lot, especially here locally in the Midlands area.
Well, Keven, we want to congratulate you and all the success that you've had. We definitely want to continue to partner with you. And hey, guys, we really appreciate you joining us today on The Brainstorm with Matt and Mike. Until next time, take care.